What is going on, everyone? Hope you are having a great week. This is the Advanced Angler. I know I have the wrong background. Here we go. This is the Advanced Angler session of the Basque and Beers podcast, Basque Kayak and Beers podcast. This is your host Armando. I am filling in for Dan Perry. Dan Perry is a little bit sick, so he couldn't record this week. So I jumped in to the opportunity to fill in for him. And so I'll be being your guest or host, I'm sorry, for this episode. We got Michael Cates, one of the OGs in when it comes to kayak bass fishing here in Texas and probably nationwide. Um, I know here in Texas, we get to hear the name Guillermo Gonzalez, Matthew Scotch, Rolando Landin, and all those great anglers, a lot of the national trails and local trails. But Michael Cates is somebody we do not disrespect his name. He is a world class kayak bass fisherman. He's been fishing for a long time, and he's one of the true OGs when it comes to the Tournament of Champions before the Hobie BOS took over the Tournament of Champions. We'll talk a little bit about that and his history here in fishing. But this show is going to focus, as you know, the Advanced Kayak Angler is focused on teaching techniques to help you improve your bass fishing experience. And we're going to be talking about fishing on Grass Lake. Michael Cage just won the classic for the North Texas Kayak Championship at Lake Athens. And that is, if you fish in Texas or if you're from Texas, as you know, Lake Athens is probably one of the grassiest lakes that you can find here in Texas. I mean, there is not a spot in that lake that doesn't have grass. It's a very beautiful lake. It's a very nice lake that produces a lot of big bass. And Michael Cates definitely took advantage of that and put a commanding wing on that tournament. So we're talking a little bit about that. For those of you that are new to the program, this is the Bass Kayak and Beers podcast. We have two shows a week. The Advanced Kayak Angler, which usually is hosted by Daniel Perry. And again, we talk about tips and tricks to help you improve your kayak fishing game. And the Real Life, which is a live show we do on YouTube and Facebook every Thursday at 7:30, hosted by yours truly, your host for today, Armando Sola. And you can also listen to the MP3 format of that live version airing every Monday. So you can listen to us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google, iHeart, every single podcast streaming platform out there. Pretty much all of them carry our podcast. So whichever you listen on, just make sure you tune in, give us your thoughts, leave us your reviews. It really does help out with the growth of the podcast. So, anyways, without further ado, let's bring Michael Cates in, talk about fishing on big grassy lakes. Michael, how are you doing, Mr. Cates?
Good, good. Thanks for having me.
It is truly an honor to have you on the podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time.
You're welcome.
By the way, Michael, congratulations. You've had a hell of a year. You won the Bassmaster Kayak Series in Possum Kingdom, and that was a truly impressive win. We never thought anybody would top Mark Pendergraft's record of 200 and something, 209, something like that, inches in a 2 day tournament. You ended up shattering that record with something like a total of 211, 212 inches over a 2 day tournament. Is that correct?
Yep. I think it was 212. I think.
212. That is amazing. So you basically average like 106 inches each day.
Yeah. Unreal.
And it's one of the true testaments to your greatness, Michael, is that you went from a kind of like a highland reservoir, right? This is, Possum Kingdom is a deep,
Hmm.
deep lake with ledges, almost no grass, very little grass anywhere. Um, a party lake, a clear water lake, a kind of the opposite, really, of Lake Athens. And you've been able to, you won the North Texas Kayak Championship, the Classic in Athens, and you won the Possum Kingdom Bassmaster Kayak Series, completely different geographically. Even though they're both in Texas and they're about 3 hours apart, but I mean, you couldn't find polar opposites in any other
Hmm.
lakes. Congratulations, man! How does that feel for you, knowing that you can be able to accomplish it on completely different scenarios?
I just feel very fortunate, man. I said this before. When it's your time, man. It don't, we all practice, we all work hard, but whenever everything goes right, it's your time, and that's how it went to both of those tournaments. I can't, man, I fish a whole lot and it doesn't always go like that. Believe me. It's just at that time it did.
Do you believe in such a thing as momentum? Do you think like having success at Possum Kingdom gave you momentum to have success on tournaments after that?
But yeah, I think yeah, I definitely, when I'm fishing good, I don't miss any fish and everything's going right. It's easy to carry it on. But earlier in the year, that wasn't happening. It just wasn't. I think as soon as the calendar rolled around to middle of May, then I like to fish deeper, and I don't like just going down the bank. I got a lot more confidence if I can find a spot and fish. Very particular spots. And once that happens, it's every year. About the middle of May, I feel a lot just more at ease. More confident.
This is kind of like the pocket where you feel like the bite is kind of targeted to what your strength is. Is that correct?
Yeah, I like to flip and I like to drag. That's what I like doing.
Well, on the Possum Kingdom event, you were catching them on a DT10, right?
On a yeah, 6XD.
6XD, that's what it was.
Yeah.
It's not a
I
DT10,
could have
the
caught them
6XD.
dragging the worm though. I caught a bunch dragging the worm. I could have done it, but I could fish so much faster and I was catching bigger average on the 6XD. I didn't have to catch as many fish to get to a 20 incher.
Wow. So yeah, that really highlights the difference between what you were doing in Possum Kingdom, and we'll talk about what you were doing in the Lake Athens for the Classic. I wanted to talk a little bit about your history. For those that don't know you and not familiar with your name, Michael, tell us, when did you started kayak bass fishing, and when did you started winning tournaments?
I think I started in 2012, and that's when I got a kayak, and I went from a boat to a kayak, and then the way I remember it, I started tournament fishing in 2014, and I won one that year. I won the TOC that year, as a matter of fact, and I've been doing it ever since. I
And a
just
little, go ahead. I'm sorry.
it's just a fun way to fish, man.
Yeah, and for those that are not familiar, the TOC was used to be, I can't remember who used to run that tournament, but tournament of champions before the Hobie BOS took over. It was just an invitational, like all clubs all across the US were invited to send their top anglers to, in this case, Lake Fork, and fish for the tournament of champions. That it's obviously very different from what it is now for the Hobie BOS, but we're
Hmm.
still talking about the top anglers from the nation coming into one spot and duking it out to see who comes on top. How did that? Let me rephrase the question. Compared to that victory to what you had on Possum Kingdom and now on the Classic, what's the difference in feelings? Not necessarily how you caught him, anything, but how do you feel when you compare one to the others?
Well, I will tell you this: the Lake Fork is where I grew up fishing, so I expect to do well. I don't always do well, but I always expect to do well there. But the win at Possum Kingdom, I mean, I've won money at that lake many, many times, but the way it happened was just so unexpected. It's just it was gifted. It was gifted to me the way this everything set up perfectly. And that was I mean, just cause obviously that many inches, that don't happen often. So that one's very special, and it's a Bassmaster event. Everybody that's ever watched tournament fishing wants one of those blue trophies, and I got one now.
Yeah, I
That's
know.
special.
That reminds me, by the way, the Hobie BOS tournament just took place in West Virginia, the New River. Congratulations on RJ
Mm.
Hoover, who won that leaded, was in first place both days. And big shout out to Drew Gregory. Drew Gregory came from 24th all the way to second place and punched his ticket for the TOC, the Hobie BOS TOC, the Tournament of Champions. Um, it wouldn't feel right to have a Tournament of Champions without Drew Gregory. So big congratulations to Drew Gregory to just pulling off just a clutch win, going from 24th to second place. And again, star of the night was RJ Hoover with first place, total dominance, first place on day one, first place on day two. That's pretty impressive. So congratulations to both of them. Congratulations to everybody that catches check on that tournament. Going back to you, Michael. Let's talk a little bit about your win at Lake Athens. First of all, how do you feel about that North Texas Kayak Championship? I know it's been one of the longest standing trails here in Texas, run by Duke Tran from Mariner Sales. Have you fished that trail before, and what are your thoughts on the next North Texas Kayak Championship?
Yes, sir. I've been fishing it since day one. I've I think I've missed two or three in the length of time it's been running. They it's good times, man. It's more of a easier entry fee for the guys just starting out, or people with families, and it's not a whole lot of risk to get involved. And man, he's put together a pretty good, impressive list of sponsors that really help out.
Yep.
Man, it's pretty impressive to me. Duke, nobody works harder than Duke, man. I'd have a mental meltdown if I had his phone for 10 minutes, man. He's always going, and nobody works harder than him. And it's good times, man. Good times.
Are you fishing the Lone Star Throwdown this year? Have you fished it before?
I've fished it, yes. I Lord willing, I plan to. I
Have they
plan to.
announced where it's going to be yet?
I
I
don't think
keep.
so.
I don't
If they
think so,
did,
right?
I missed it.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Last year it was on Belton and
Stillhouse and Belton.
Steelhouse. Yeah, I got up there. I won a little money last year there.
Oh yeah. What
Steelhouse.
what place did you ended up on
I'm
that?
not. I can't remember. Maybe six.
Oh, nice.
I don't really. Yeah, I think so. That sounds right. Fifth or six. I was just fishing the grass at Steelhouse. If I
Steelhouse
can fish.
was so low that both Belton and Steelhouse, but I feel like Steelhouse was really low that year.
Yeah, I think it's even lower this year. I'm going not this Saturday, but next Saturday to fish a tournament there. Or I
Well,
plan to. It's
hydrate
low,
pop.
man.
No, it's been hot, man. How was it? Let me ask you this: how are you doing with the heat in Lake Athens? Because I mean, it was what 100 and it was
It was
more
hot,
than
man.
100.
It was
How
hot.
how did you manage that heat?
Well, one thing I work in it, so if I'm not working, it's a piece of cake. But man, just drink a lot of water. Drink way more water than you think you should. You know, that's my advice to everybody. Get a cooler, keep your water cool, and just drink more than. I start drinking from the minute I wake up on tournament day, just killing bottles of water, so I'm good and hydrated. And I just don't stop. I probably drank a dozen bottles of water that day.
It's
As a matter of
crazy.
fact,
I
I'm
know
pretty
it's
sure I did a dozen.
yeah.
That's
You
my
have
only.
to.
Yeah, man. Put on some sunscreen. If you just keep yourself covered as much as you can.
Yeah,
It was hot though, because there wasn't much wind, man. It was hot the other day. I felt sorry for those guys pedaling, man.
yeah. I bet. Yeah, that was no fun.
It was
A
hot, man.
motor would definitely help you out on that one. Now,
Yeah.
Lake Athens not a big lake; it's actually a pretty small lake, but still, I mean,
hmm
when you have to pedal in this hot weather, it's not fun. So, how do you? Let's talk about how you found them in pre-fishing. Let's talk about pre-fishing first. How much time
Okay.
were you able to get to pre-fish, and what was your pre-fishing routine? Are you casting? Are you just graphing? What do you look for in pre-fishing?
Well, I know that lake very, very well. I've been fishing it for not. I probably spent more hours on that lake than the rest of the field combined over my lifetime. So I know it very very well. And it doesn't always equal success, but I knew the way I usually do it in the summer. I fish the main lake more, and I'll either drag a big worm around the grass edges or get in the middle of the grass and just flip. Either way, you can catch a great big one. Either way, and
So
that's why I
on
was
the
flipping. Go ahead.
so on pre-fishing, were you actually casting to find, or are you one of those that wants to leave the fish alone and just find where they are with your graph?
Oh no, well in the grass I couldn't really do that, man.
Yeah.
Grass fishing is tough because they're not in the same place every time. I mean, you might have a point that or channel swing that's got, and it might hold fish day in and day out. But when you're looking at a field of grass, man, it's not. You know what I'll do is I'll go through there real fast and just flip around. I get a bite, I'll mark a waypoint. At the end of the day, I look at my map and see what's in common, because it's just a flat. And you'll see that they're on a certain contour or they're at every point or they're at every ditch, and then you have an idea and you move from there to the next one and look for something like that.
Interesting. Now, let me ask you, when you are graphing, I know, for example, Possum Kingdom, Rocky Lake, not a lot of grass, Athens, grass everywhere. Do you change the settings on your fish finder to compensate to try to help you pinpoint? Do you do anything with the fish finder differently from a rocky lake to a grass lake?
Well, you have to change the settings just about every lake because of the sediment in the water to get a
Yeah.
real clear picture. But generally, as a rule of thumb, I use when I'm side scanning, I use a lower frequency when I'm looking further out, deeper water, further out, and a higher frequency when I'm up shallower. That's generally it's a rule of thumb. That's how I do it. And I just switched from Lowrance to Hummingbird, and I, I'm still getting used to the Hummingbird. It's got a lot more settings, but I've always been a Lowrance guy, and I wanted to get the Mega 360. So I took some of that money I won and invested in a Hummingbird setup with a Mega 360.
And how has it compared to the Lawrence units that you've had in the past?
Well, if I'm going to be honest, the Mega Live is inferior to the active target, man.
Yep.
At least in my ability to use it, it's just not as good. So much so, I'm thinking about putting two grass on my boat now, and I've been against that from the start. But that the Mega Live just isn't as good. We'll see. We'll see. I got to get. It doesn't work that good in grass. So when I get to a lake that doesn't have grass, it's got timber. Then I'll be able to see if I can use it to effect. But I scoped some fish out and caught them in practice, and that morning of the tournament I did. But it's just not as good. But that Mega 360 is everything is advertised to be. Man, it's awesome.
That's pretty cool. So when I wanted to go back on what you said, because I find that very interesting, and I think that's a lesson for not just myself, but our listeners. So once you find the bites on practice, and then you mark it on your GPS. So when you said you when you get home, I guess you compare the maps to talk talk me through about that process where you catch the fish and then
Okay.
mark it and look at what they were where they
Well,
were.
the icon I've always used is a red fish. Means one that I caught or I at least saw it and I know it was a bass, you know, whether I got it in the boat or not. As soon as I get the fish, I mark a waypoint right there because I want where my boat is. Now when you're casting, that red fish is where you have to set your boat. But if you're flipping, that's where the fish is, right there. And then after the day, you get 8 or 10 or 15 bites a day, or sometimes it'll take 2 trips to get that many bites. But then, like when I'm headed back to the ramp, I'll uh, zoom out on the map and you'll see I got all my bites in this certain kind of water. So next time you just concentrate on that certain kind of water somewhere else and see what it's like. That's to me, that's the only way to grass fish in a big expanse of grass. And what I found was most of the fish were 8 feet, maybe even 6 feet of the better quality fish. But then I found that here's what I do, man. I was graphing looking for the deepest hydrilla I could find. That came off the bottom about 4 foot or more. And I saw some deep grass. So I just take my worm off and just throw my hook out there and catch it to see if it's hydrilla, because I can't see it.
Yeah.
I can't see it. If it's coontail, it's not nearly as good, but if it's hydrilla, that's something to fish. And so I found a little bit deeper patch. It was growing up like 5 feet off the bottom. It's 12 feet of water. And that's where I caught my two biggest ones. Out of that one, it's a small patch, man. 25 feet circle, and it was right next to it. It's on a flat, right next to a ditch. So it was perfect. It worked out perfect.
I wanted to share. Go ahead.
I was going to say, my last 2 hours, I was going round and round that patch, man, and I caught like 6 or 8 just right there, man, including my two biggest ones.
I wanted to share the screen because I know maybe for those that are new to fishing, this is what, when we talk about hydrilla, this is what it looks like, right? Am I correct here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's hydrilla. Why do you have any reason to believe that why hydrilla is going to be better to target when you see it than coontail or any other milfoil or any of the other grass?
Well, look, from my experience, any kind of grass in a lake is where I want to start to fish, whatever kind of grass it is. But if there's hydrilla, I want to fish the hydrilla. And I don't know exactly what it is. I've never got a fish to tell me, but here's what I think. Everything.
Have you asked?
Yeah, I have asked hundreds of times. Everything that a fish does is related to forage or to cover. So it has to have the best available forage and cover under the hydrilla, or he wouldn't choose it. There would be no reason for him to choose it. Everything would be created equal. So there's something, I think they grow off the bottom 5 feet, but the current, I think it lays it over. So there's a canopy underneath,
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that's what I was doing. I was just dropping a big weight through that canopy.
And when you're graphing this area, like Lake Athens is like, you say like, well, fish the grass. Well, the grass is pretty much everywhere on that lake, other than targeting hydrilla. What do you start, especially on summer? Where do you start looking for bass? You're saying, okay, it's the dead of summer, temperatures are in the hundreds. It's been in the hundreds for the last 2 months. Where do you think bass are going to be in relation to where you start graphing and looking for bass in pre-fishing?
What I do is I go toward the main lake, and I find however deep, as an average, however deep the grass grows out to, then I find a point at that depth, and I'll start there. Or a ditch. If a ditch cuts through the grass, any kind of bottom change, I would start my search there. But so often, man, on a big, huge grass lake expanse, so often they're just in the middle of the flat, man. Now there might be something different that, for whatever reason, you catch 5 flips at a certain area, and you can't really tell from your graph what the difference is. But there's a reason. I don't know what it is. But that's why if I'm going to a new lake and it's summertime, the water's hot, if it's anywhere in Texas, I'm just gonna get the biggest plum worm I have, and I'm gonna fish the grass edge on a point. Then I'll go to the next one till I make sure that's not the deal, because that's how to catch the biggest fish in the lake. That's the best way I know to catch the biggest one. And then if it's thick grass, I'll go just get in there and start shallow and work your way out deep till you find out. I just zigzag back and forth, back and forth. At the end of the day, I look at my waypoints, and there's a correlation between them.
Yeah.
Every time. I just got to find it,
What is the best bait you recommend when you're when you're in pre-fishing, you look in to see where they are. Do you
Hmm.
use a specific bait other than
I
what you would use on a tournament?
No, I use the same generally. I just I what I generally these days, thanks to my buddy Matt Flett, he turned me on to it's called a creature hog
Hmm.
by Berkeley, that
Yeah,
Max scent, man. And I'm a believer in that. Just a black one, South South African special or black and blue.
yeah.
I'm a believer in that thing. I think they hold it, man. I think it feels mushy to them, and they love. And I use the other day I was using a 1 ounce weight and a black, blue, and purple punch skirt. So I was using a real big bait, man. Where the guys around me were using smaller baits, I noticed. No skirt or nothing like that. Maybe that had a difference. I don't know, but I think the difference was that one little patch of hydrilla I found. I think.
And so basically, what you want to do, I'm assuming going by what you're saying, if you are fishing a lake that's grass everywhere, you're looking for that patch that stands out, right? Like the
Hmm.
not, when not dead space. Like when you look at, Lake Fork. Lake Fork has a lot of flats, right?
Hmm.
And you can find those bass on flats a certain time of the year. But generally, you want to look for something that has completely different. Now, let's say, for example, like going back to Lake Fork, there's timber everywhere. So you want to look for a
Hmm.
little bit of that timber that's outside the cluster of timbers. You see this shoreline full of timber, and then all of a sudden you see this offshore point that has two or three isolated timbers. My experience, that always holds fish. I'm
Hmm.
assuming with grass, kind of the same thing when you have all the shoreline and every square inch of shoreline
Definitely.
in Athens is grass. So you're looking for that little patch that's outside that stands out.
Yeah, I want the grass that sticks as far off of the bank as I can find. Because one thing, less people fish it. So, everybody, I mean, it's a grass lake. Everybody knows they're in the grass. But like where I was fishing, I never seen, in 4 times, including the tournament I went to, I never saw anybody else fish it. They stopped before they got to it because it was out in the middle. It's a little hump. And just a slight hump right next to a ditch that's off of a flat, a slight high spot, and those things are golden, man. If you can find something like that, Lake Athens gets more pressure than any lake.
Yeah.
I mean, it's on par with the pressure Fort gets, and it's grass, so everybody
It's a
fishes the
smaller
grass. It's
lake too, yeah.
a lot smaller, and they go all 3 shifts, man. There's guys that fish there at night. I mean, there'll be 30 or 40 boats in the parking lot every night, man. And it's so you if you can find something that maybe a few less fishermen have fished, you're in, man. Because I mean, they're everybody knows they're in the grass. So
How deep were you catching those bass?
the two bigger ones were about 12 feet. The That's the spot I found. That's what made it unique. It was hydrilla that grew like 5, maybe 6 feet off the bottom, but the water was 12 feet deep. You can't see it with your eye, so people didn't know to fish it. They were just driving right over it. And most of the fish and most of the guys I saw, you get to like 8 feet of water, and you can see the grass grows up to 7 feet, and you
Yeah.
just drop it through there, drop it. And there's a lot of fish doing that, and you can catch a big one doing that. But I just had a feeling, man. I had a feeling. I even told my buddy I showed him that's where it's going to go down if it goes down, man. And it did, man. Just like I drew it up. It's amazing. I don't
Isn't
know.
it isn't it great the plan comes together?
Yes, it hardly ever works out that way, man.
Right.
Not for me.
I don't think for most of us, but let's look a little bit on the numbers here. I'm going to share the screen of the Tourney X. So you got we got to show a picture of this one, the 22 and 3/4. So was that big bass of the day as well, or did
Yes, sir.
somebody
It was.
catch a bigger bass?
That was the big one of the day.
That is, it's a little slender, but it's still a big bass nevertheless.
Hmm.
20, yeah, 22 and 3/4. and then your second fish was 20 and a half, 19, 18 and three quarters, 18 and three quarters. Very consistent all across the board. By the way, Matthew Flint, who mentioned, came up fourth. Congratulations also to Eric Simeon, Brian Howe, another great angler, Matthew Flint, Greg Hunt, Philip Wyatt, Chris Crago, Dan Williams, Matt Keppel, and Joey Roel, all in the top 10. Congratulations to everybody that took place and caught a check on that one. 39 anglers, 200 fish caught. The top 25 out of 39 got a limit, and the smallest limit was 75. So that lake showed out pretty good. And then only three people, assuming they did show up, did not catch a fish. So I mean, it was a pretty consistent bite, even though it was probably hot as hell that day. I could imagine.
It was hot. It was tough. It was. I mean, I had a good day, but I had to work for them. You know, it was steady. I'd catch a fish every 15 minutes all day. You know, and which I mean that's good for me. You know, 4 fish an hour is just fine with me.
Yeah, I'll take that day. Heck, I'll take
Me
four
too,
fish in
man.
8 hours, unless I'm on
You
a
know,
tournament.
we were talking about that Mega 360 in practice. I found some what I believe to be brim beds with that thing. They're right on the edge of the grass at about 7 feet of water. And that was my every time I went there, I caught one over 22. And that was my ace in the hole. But I just couldn't leave the grass. I was getting too many bites. You know, I just never did go to it. That's how I thought really if I caught a big one, it would be there, you know, but I didn't even go to it.
Yeah, so you didn't have to go to Plan B.
No.
I think going back to what you were saying about looking for that unique spot, that even though everything is grass, but that spot was kind of isolated compared to the rest. It really
Yes.
brings the subject of like, if everything's grass, then the bass are going to be spread out. But when you
Hmm.
find that spot of grass, that's big enough to hold the school of bass, they're gonna be not spread out, but just conglomerated on that spot.
Hmm.
What's the radius? You know, if you can eyeball it, of how big that patch of grass was.
25 feet around.
Really? Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
it
a
might have been a little longer, maybe 40 feet long by 25 feet across. Then it dropped off into 15 feet of water on one side and about 14 to 15 on the other side. So it went right to the drop, you know.
And as far as current, I wanted to touch on this because I know with this hot weather, the what was the temperature of the water? Was it close to
Uh
90? Got to be
90,
close to
92 or something.
92. Holy crap. So I think conventional wisdom of bass fishing would lead you to believe those fish trying to get away from that sun and trying to get
Mhm.
into deeper water. Does current play a part? I know, it's Lake Athens. There's not a lot of current, but there still is a little bit of current because it is moving water. It's just damn, uh, pretty much creek. Do you think because it was close to that ditch, there was enough current right there? There was kind of like maybe cooler waters, or did
W-
that play a part?
Well, I've there's not any current flowing through Lake Athens. It's a
Yeah.
spillway, so if it's not dumping over the spillway,
Yeah.
there's no flow through. However, there is current generated from the pleasure boats, the wake boats, man,
Oh yeah.
and they keep everything stirred up. They don't even start biting good until those things get out there, you know. And the grass is just always stirred up and everything, and it makes them bite. It makes them bite good too.
How was that's another good point because it's a small lake and it can feel crowded very, very quickly. And I think it only has
Hmm.
like one boat ramp, but there's a lot of boat houses. And I know there's a lot of pleasure boaters, a lot of jet skis, a lot of wakeboards and all that. How did you manage? Was that something that played a part in, making it more difficult? I know with the hot weather, maybe that not that many people are out on the lake, or maybe they were trying to cool off.
There wasn't as many as there's on tournament day was the less I've seen from all the times I practiced. They probably ran out of gas money. I don't know. It's hard living these days, man.
Yeah.
But hey, I personally want more. I mean, my best days have been out there when it's just like a washing machine. Just makes everything awake. Makes them. I think they're afraid. They're on edge. The brim are going everywhere, and they're afraid to let something pass them by without taking a taste of it. It's
What
up.
were the I know you
Go ahead.
mentioned you were flipping, but and you touched on it, the South African color, which by the way, that I don't know what is it with that color and grass lakes, but it really, I mean, that particular color. I know Zoom used to make a brush hog that was the South African Fiesta or something like that,
Hmm.
which they discontinued. And I think it was last year in Toledo Bend, somebody caught two lake records for Toledo Bend using at least that's what it was reported, if I remember the article correctly, using that color or pattern, the South African special. Um, do you think that have you noticed that 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 particular color shines more in grassy lakes than any other, or do you think it just completely shines in whatever lake you throw it at?
Be honest, I haven't used it that much. I bought a bag because I couldn't find black and blue. Generally,
Yeah,
whenever this is something I've just kind of discovered the last 2 years that in general, if you're fishing deep grass over 8 feet or over, your darker colors are better because I think it's dark under there.
yeah,
I just think it blends in better. Back in the day, I just used to flip watermelon red magic brush hog was my go-to. With a 1 ounce weight and just flip it around. But these last couple of years, I don't know if it's the pressure or whatever, but they wanted a little bit smaller bait, a wide and short profile. Seems like that to me. That's what I got the most confidence in to get a bite. You could probably go through there with something different and get a bite, but that's just what I have the most confidence in. And South African special is good. I got turned on to that by a guy on I think it was Lake Grapevine that he won all of our money that day on a South African brush hog.
yeah. My biggest uh bass on Lake. No, I regress. My biggest bass on Lake Grapevine was on a drop shot minnow back when I started bass fishing about 5 years ago. It was. I wish I would. I didn't have a weight scale. I didn't have a measuring board. I didn't even have a kayak back then, and I have the picture somewhere in my social media, but it had to be something like a 24 incher. It was a
Hmm.
post spawn female. But other than that, I the second biggest bass that I've caught on Lake Grapevine, which is not an easy lake to catch bass, by the way, was with that South African brush hog, which again they discontinued that for Zoom. I don't know why they discontinued it. I guess they weren't selling it, but I mean that thing just shined, and I did catch it on a patch of grass up in Lake Grapevine, and I loved it. But again, they don't have that anymore, at least not on that pattern.
I wasn't aware of that.
Well, the brush hog, they still
Yeah.
have the Zoom ribbon tail worm, the 10-inch
Hmm.
worm with that pattern, but for some reason, unless they brought it back, but from whatever reason, they discontinued that one on the brush hog. But it was like I was we were mentioning it's been a really really good bait, that pattern, for whatever reason, and I don't know why, but I feel like on grass lakes it works even better. Now, one of the things that I have a challenge with throwing brush hogs on, especially on that thick of a grass like Lake Athens, is I tend to favor the soft plastic that have that little, hook keeper notch to kind of like,
Hmm.
make it more weedless. With the brush hogs, I always, after a couple of times casting it, especially if I already got one bite, then, Texas rigging it is still not weedless. Do you
Hmm.
there's Are there any other soft plastic baits that you tend to target using because of that, little hook keeper, what kind of makes it more weedless?
Well, any of the beaver
Yep.
baits. You know, I haven't caught a fish flipping a brush hog out of Lake Athens in 2 years. Or I caught one or two last year, and I think because it's a big profile, and I think the pressure. They want something
Yeah.
more subtle without a lot of this flapping.
Yeah.
That's the way I get most of my bites. And I think any of the beaver baits are good. I just have a lot better luck on dark colors. these days wherever I go if it's grass.
Michael, you're too humble. What you've done has nothing to do with luck. I think you're just talented, wise, and just all around a great angler. So I don't think it was just luck. I mean, I think you've proven yourself throughout the years being just one of the top anglers here in Texas. What
Thank you.
other what other, advice you have for, like, if you're looking for fish grassy lakes, especially in summer? What other things do you look for? What other things are here that I'm missing that we might add to the
I
tips
will
and
tell
tricks?
you. I'll tell you this. My dad taught me this. I grew up fishing Lake Fork with my dad when it had grass, and here's what he taught me: whatever lake you're at, or whatever particular part of the lake you're at, find out where the grass, how far out it goes until it starts. Either if it's a hard edge or if usually it just tapers. You know, however, is the deepest the grass can go. Find the first piece of hard cover next to that, and that's where the biggest fish in the area will stay. So at Lake Fork, it was it was 9 feet. It was the general in the mid to upper lake at Lake Fork. Year in, year out, it grew out to about 9 feet. So we would fish a flat with a creek that came to it at 9 feet, and fish all the trees right there, and it worked. At Lake Athens, there's not any hard cover like that. So that's different. You just want to find, if it's possible, you want to find some kind of depth change. Don't even pay attention to the grass. Pay attention to the bottom contour if you can. And like I knew it grew out to about 12 feet as a rule of thumb. It grows out even deeper than that. So what I wanted was something deeper that rose up to 12 feet and it had a drop off, within reasonable distance. And that's what I look for.
Just kind of like that hard drop off, not necessarily tapering down, but just like that cut. It's like a cliff.
If you can find something like that, that's ideal. In Athens, you're not going to find anything like that. You're just going to. East Texas lakes are generally way less contoured. But even if it's 15 feet a cast from you, that's deep water. That's good enough. It'll be better than the other side of the flat that you're 100 yards from the 15 foot. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
It's just better. It's just better, especially for the larger fish.
That's interesting. What is your setup when you are fishing deep grass? You're throwing them. You said a half inch or an inch. I'm sorry, not half inch. A half ounce or a full ounce bullet weight.
It's a 1 ounce, 1 ounce
1 ounce
weight.
bullet.
I change. I alternate between 3/4 of an
Mm.
ounce or 1 ounce to find out, or even an ounce and a quarter at times. Sometimes they like it, really falling. Sometimes they like it to coast down a little bit, and the only way to find that out is on a given day, is just to try them all. Whatever you can get through the grass with, or however much weight it takes, I start with that. So I could get down through that grass with 3/4, and I start. But I found out in one day in practice, it was real windy, and I had a good day, man. I switched to a 1 ounce because it was so windy, and I got a lot more bites. So I stuck with that when the tournament came. And what I use, matter of fact, it was a brand new rod I was using. I build rods, and I made myself a 711 heavy flipping stick, 8 foot rod, and it did the job, man. It was I'm very impressed with it. You want to, you know, you want, I used to think all the time. My dad used to use 8 foot rod, man. I'm thinking, and I never did back in the day, but it makes a difference. You have more control because the fish is in the grass, and when you feel him bite, he's by the time you'll feel like a little tick, but he's already took whatever slack you had in your line, and he went under. So
Yeah.
you got to get him. You got to get him back, man. And that extra 6 inches matters. It does for me. That's before that I use a 7.9 and a 7.6 sometimes, but I'm sold on the longer rod now.
And what type of line do you recommend, especially with
60
grassy lakes?
60 pound braid if what I was doing.
Do you throw a leader in it or just straight
No,
braid?
straight braid.
Any color in particular that for braid that you want to use? Like, do you want it to camouflage a little bit? Do you do like some people that just kind of put a black marker on it on the line to kind of like hide it a little bit? What do
That's
you
what I
do? You do
do.
anything?
I just take a Sharpie every now and then and color the last 3 feet of the line. Man, let's think about this. Usually, that fish only has a split second because that thing is zooming down. He's not going to see your line. He's got a split second. You zooms down, he looks at it, you raise it up, and he snatches it that fast. So I'm not concerned about him seeing my line generally, but I do color it black periodically throughout the day as it needs it.
So once you start casting, let's say you start flipping on the grass, you let it drop. What do you do next? Do you pop it or do you do straight retrieval, one shot? Do you like
I,
try to cover fast a lot of line, or are you more a lot of I'm sorry, not a lot of line, but do you try to cover a lot of area fast, or you generally more patient, pop it a couple of times before you retrieve it? How do you do? What's your
yeah,
routine for that?
I'll pitch it out there, let it hit the bottom, and I'll raise it up, just a little pop. Just raise it up, let it hit again, do that again, and then depends on how deep of the water. When it's deeper water, I'm more aggressive with the pop. If I'm in 4 foot of water, I just raise it up slower. Because it's just not as much water there, and
Yeah,
it might spook them. That's just what I think. But like the other day, I was that's another something I might have been doing something different. Is man, I was jigging it hard, and then when it fell back down, when I got about 2 feet from the bottom, I'd jig it up and they'd snatch it, man. They up up off the bottom some, so it just looked like a yo-yo going across there, and they'd snatch it right at my boat. A bunch of them did it that way, and I think it's just a reaction, man. They just can't stand it. It's something, and they just can't stand it, man.
it becomes something like then they may not even be looking to feed; they just a primal instinct just
I think
takes
so,
over.
man. Most days it's not like that. Most days I don't have to jig it like that, But I was just finding out that because I knew there was fish there. See, that makes a big difference too. I know I was sitting on top of fish. I knew it. So I wanted to do any little subtle thing I could do to make them bite. If you're going across the grass flat I've never been before and I don't know where there's fish, I generally just give it 2 shakes and then move to the. I don't know how far. This is what I'd love to know. I would love to know this. When you drop it down, how far will a fish swim through the grass to get it? I would love to know that, you know, because that changes everything when you know that, because then you know how
Yeah.
far to your next flip, so you can cover a lot more water. So I generally just go right in front of the boat all the way around, and then I'll move forward a few feet and do it again all the way around. Then I'll zigzag back and forth, and then if you don't get a bite, it's hard. It's just hard to get anything figured out. But if you get a few bites, you'll figure it out, man. It'll all pop up at your map, where you need to be.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I think f- so. Going by what you're saying, just kind of put a visual image on it. You get to your spot, and then you not fan casting because you're not casting, but you kind of like same principle with flipping. You're flipping. In other words, you start
Hmm.
at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock,
Yes, sir.
eight, 9, 12. Keep going around 360, and then you don't get any bite. You keep moving up, moving up, moving up, right?
Yep.
Until
Yep.
you
And
and
then I'll
just
move my boat in shallow. Then I'll take my boat back out. So I'm making a zigzag across, and I'm throwing 4 or 5 flips in the front of the boat. So I'm covering. By the time it's said and done, I've covered the whole thing. Unless I get a clue exactly what depth to be in, then that's where I stay.
interesting stuff. And I think that when it's Grass Lake, I would imagine, and Michael, you can correct me. You're the one with all the trophies and the checks, but I would imagine it's you have to be more patient and more methodical
Hmm.
in finding the bass than you would, for example, on a lake that going back to Possum Kingdom, where you can graph it and
Hmm.
the schools of bass are going to be jumping out of the image. Where if they're on grass, you're not really going to see it. In this
Mm-mm.
case, and again, you can correct me. In this case, you're not looking when you're in the graph looking for bass, you're looking for structure more than looking for bass itself. Because again, such a deep grass, you really, unless they're on top of the grass, you're not going to be able to find them
Mm-hmm.
on your graph. You're just saying, okay, this looks like a spot where they might be. So I'm looking for underwater grass versus if you're in Possum Kingdom, going listening a little bit to. By the great episode. One of my favorite episodes on Kayak Bass Nation was you talking about how you won Possum Kingdom, and some of the talking points were hilarious. Some of the sound bites I loved, especially the ones where you're talking about trying. You had like a 22-incher and you had a boat close to you, so you pretended you were snagged, so the boat didn't
Yeah.
realize you actually were catching 8-pounders. That was genius. I love that part. Anybody that's listening to this podcast, go to the KBN Nation. That was sometime in, when was that, in May? Look for that
Uh,
May episode, right?
I
Where
think it was
Michael
in
Gates,
June. June.
June, yeah. So where Michael Cates talk about his winning Possum Kingdom, that is golden piece of information. Marty Hughes was on that show as well, and I forgot the
Yeah, Marty was.
name and the name of the other gentleman. But going back to what we're talking about, when you're in Possum Kingdom, then you look for schools of bass, right? Because now it's a more open structure.
Mm-hmm.
You look at offshore points, you look at the timber. If there's a school of bass, you can clearly, as long as the school is big enough, you
Mm-hmm.
can clearly see there's a school of something over there. So
Yes.
that really changes your perspective on how you break down a lake that's clear water, no grass, versus a lake that's maybe stained water, grass. Now you're not looking for the bass, you're looking for where you might think there would be anything that stands out
The
on that.
best
And then,
habitat. The
yeah,
best
the best
habitat. What
habitat.
you're looking for.
Do you? I obviously, when we're talking about post spawn and spawning, that's what's the best habitat. It's going to change. First of all, winter, the grass dies down.
Mm-hmm.
Spawning season, we know they're going to be spawning up in shallow, but generally, if this would have been, let's say, the dead of winter, where most of the
Mm-hmm.
grass, especially the deep grass, um, might have died off.
Mm-hmm.
Where how would you what would you define great habitat for bass on a winter grassy
Well,
lake?
if we're talking about Athens in specific, or even Fork when it had grass, in the wintertime, in the summertime, I fish the main lake, man, the main basin, and whatever contours I can find within the grass, that's where I at least start. In the wintertime, I go shallow all the way to the back and then work my way back out. I'm looking for grass too, throwing a rattle trap or jerk bait over the grass, something like that. And I'm sooner or later you're going to find out, man. And that's my favorite way to fish is in the winter. I like it in the winter, but it's like the grass isn't in 15 feet of water, so it's everything is condensed to a flat. When it gets sun, the most sun. That's what you're looking for because it's got the still the healthiest grass available. That's the best habitat.
Yeah, that's interesting. How it changes. What we define as best habitat is going to change depending if it's summer,
Hmm.
winter, fall, spawn,
Hey,
or
there's
post
plenty of
spawn.
guys. Excuse me. There's plenty of guys that catch them deep at Athens throwing a rig in the winter. Plenty. I
Yeah.
mean, it'll be full, but that's just not the way I like to do it. If I can help it, I like I love shallow water power fishing when I can do it. And unfortunately, there's a lot less of that going on these days just due to the pressure. I think it's harder to get on a good chatterbait bite or spinnerbait bite that would carry you to a win. Now you gotta find something different, man. Different.
That's funny that you mentioned that because I've noticed that this year. I mean, ever
Hmm.
since I fished Lake Dardanelle for the Hobie BOS last year, which was a great chatterbait. I especially day one, I found a great chatterbait bite. But ever since then, I don't know what's happened with the chatterbait bite, but I feel like it's really died down. Not just talking about summer, which I kind of expect on summer, but
Hmm.
even on post spawn and pre spawn. Um, when usually you would, especially pre spawn, where you figured bass are going to be munching on Chad before the spawning season. I just felt like, man, they're not that kind of like power bait, chatter bait, shallow water bite is not what it used to be.
I
Maybe
agree.
you pers-
I've noticed it the last couple of years. I agree. My in the winters when I get to fish more because of my job, and I spend a lot of time at Lake Fork and Lake Palestine. And these last well, last this past winter was the worst I've ever had, man. It just, I mean, it just wasn't. I don't know if it's, maybe lakes go up and down, or whatever. But I haven't. I can't tell you the last time I've got on a bank and just threw a chatterbait down the bank and caught enough fish to win a tournament. It just hadn't happened for me like that in a
yeah, and
long time, man.
3 4 years ago, I mean, look at one of my favorite personalities in tournament, Jake Harshman. I remember his first Hobie BOS in, I think it was Guntersville. I mean, that's what he did, just kind of like beat the bank with a jackhammer and, and won the tournament. I've known he's done
Hmm.
that a couple of times. And again, we're talking about Texas. I'm assuming, some other river, somebody type of bodies of water are going to be different. But I feel
Hmm.
like at least here in Texas or this region of the country where it's kind of like, you know, reservoirs, it's just not there. I don't know why. And it used, I mean, 4 years ago when I started throwing a jackhammer, man, it would completely change my fishing experience. And now it
Hmm.
seems like I can get a bite out of it.
Yeah, me either. I just don't have enough confidence. Like I would rather slow down and just flip. I have more confidence doing that these days. If in a tournament, So I just have a lot more confidence to slow down and give a more precise presentation over and over again. I think at the end of the day I'll have what the most I can catch as opposed to just running around to every secondary point in a creek and throwing a chatterbait. But there's guys that do it. But they have the confidence to keep throwing it through the dry spell. I
Yeah.
don't, man. If I'm somewhere where I think there's fish, my way of thinking, I gotta figure out a way to catch these fish because I think they're here. And a lot of times that's I'll drag a brush hog across it, a Carolina rig lizard, whatever I gotta do, you know, and I'll forego the chatterbait or the spinnerbait. Probably to my detriment, but that's just the way it's been working. I think in 2020, everybody got a boat for COVID, man,
Yeah.
and the lakes have been just unreal pressured
Yeah.
since then. It has
Yeah.
to have an effect, man. It has to,
Yeah.
And we all love the chatterbait, and I
Yeah.
think
You're right. No,
I just
I'm
think
sorry, I
that's it.
interrupted. Yeah.
No, it's okay. I just think that's it, man. I think
Yeah.
it's that simple.
I really think it's that simple too. Like, I honestly believe like a lot of people with COVID just went outside and, there was one of the few activities you can do because you can do it by yourself. You can get a family,
Hmm.
friends on the boat and just be and fish. And I've really noticed that it just really that bait. I mean, I think it's everybody and their mother was throwing that for the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years. And now it's just like I think there's I think over time and generations, just like bass are now no different. I think it's a survival instinct to kind of avoid things that start, you know, ingrating in their primal.
Hmm.
And I'm not, I'm going down the rabbit hole honestly without anything other than my own opinion because I'm not a bass biologist. But again, my opinion is, you know, there are certain types of lizards that are certain not lizards reptiles, um snakes that are certain color, that are bright color because to signify that they're venomous, and there are
Hmm.
certain type of prey, or not prey, predator, that avoid this type of snakes because of their color.
Hmm.
And then there are imitation snakes that try to imitate that pattern to make the predator think they're venomous. And I'm going down the rabbit hole, and I know I'm getting off topic, but the point that I want to make is like, just as those predators and prey develop an instinct to what they see, I believe, and I could be completely wrong, that bass can, after a prolonged time of the same bait being thrown over and over and over, whether it's what the bait looks like or what the bait sounds like, they start developing this like this sound, this vibration, this frequency is not good for me. Like the last
Mm-hmm.
time I've been, I've chased this bait with this type of noise or frequency or color, something bad happened, catch and release.
Mm-hmm.
So I could be completely wrong on this. I would love to hear the answer, but that's my theory on it. What do you think?
Well, I'm no biologist either, so what I think is, I think you're probably onto something. Just from my experience, that a chatterbait. If you've ever heard a jackhammer, it makes a lot of noise in the water.
Yeah.
Well, if you're the third one that's went down this bank today with a jackhammer, and there was 7 more yesterday, and that noise no longer signifies anything good to those fish,
Yeah.
it does. It just signifies. I don't know if they're flat out scared, they learn to be scared, or it's just whole hum. I don't know what it is, but they don't react to it as well, except on the days when they're really, really biting.
Yeah.
I'm talking about a normal day, and you can go, a long way before you finally run into one that either hasn't seen it or he's too dumb to know, and just
Yeah.
snatches it. Well, I'm not willing to most day on a tournament. Put it in a tournament. I'm usually not willing to go those long dry spells with that. I'd rather
Yeah.
slow down and try to catch the ones I believe to be there.
Yeah. And that's the kind of like the age old debate on bass fishing and the kayak bass fishing in general, run and gun or break down a spot. And,
Hmm.
people have had success in both sides of it. And obviously, what you did on Possum Kingdom, what you did at Lake Athens kind of seems similar in the way that it's like, this is the spot. I know they're here. I'm not going to run and gun. I'm just going to stick to my guns and figure out whether it's changing the bait, changing the approach, changing the
Hmm.
angle. And it's again the age old debate. I hear people say run and gun. I hear people say
Hmm.
breakdown, and we've seen success. And I think it all depends. I would imagine also on a summer, hot summer day when the water temperature, like you mentioned, is 92 degrees, running gun is probably, in my opinion, not going to be the best unless you're
Hmm.
trying to find them. But once you find them, try to stick to that area, in my opinion, because they're not going to be out there as active feeding. They're going to be more lethargic. Wherever they are, that's where they're going to stay
Hmm.
until they start feeding. They get hungry enough to start feeding and brave the elements. But
Yeah, then they bite no matter where you're at. But
yeah,
it's the
no matter
times
what you
in
got or what you're
between.
throwing. Yeah,
In between those times, you have
yeah,
to catch fish if you're going to win a tournament.
yeah,
And the way I try to, hopefully I've already been there to practice, so I knew where some fish were yesterday or whatever day. So hopefully I can make them bite in that general area or an area very, very similar. That's the way I look at it. I'm more of a specific. I like to fish something specific if I can, whatever it is. It could be anything. As long as it's specific, it has the right ingredients, and if I got confidence that there's something there, man, I'll just fish it to death. And it don't always work out. Believe me, it
yeah,
don't always work out, man. Sometimes I weigh in 3 fish.
yeah. Well, Michael, I've had you for just over an hour, and I appreciate your time. I know your work is it's a hard work, so I'm sure you want to get a good night's rest. So I thank you again for taking the time to be on the podcast and talk to us about your how you targeted on grassy lakes. I'm sure all that information is going to be useful to a lot of us that are a fan of this sport. I wanted to give you a couple of minutes that if you want to shut out. I know you work as an HVAC specialist. If you want to shut out your business, I know you mentioned you make your own rods. If that's something that people can buy from you, whatever. If you have any sponsors, anybody you want to thank or plug in, feel free to do it.
Okay, thank you. My business is Optimum America. It's we're based out of Arlington, the western half of DFW, and I've been doing it forever. My brother works with me, and we're honest, just regular, hardworking American men. And if you need us, just give us a holler. Look us up. We got www.optimumerico.com. And I just want to thank my wife. You know, it's easy to take things like this for granted for me. Is I have a wife that doesn't give me the blues for going fishing, and I've known guys over. My brother was married to one that was the opposite, you know, and it's over the years it's been easy for me to take that for granted, but I don't anymore. So I thank my wife for just it makes it easier when you're not coming home to a ruckus, you know.
Yeah.
And my brother, he handles the business while I'm gone. I couldn't do it. I didn't have to travel for this tournament. Sometimes I take off for a week and I come back and my house is still standing and the business is still, there's that kind of support's invaluable in my opinion. And I thank God, man. Like I told you earlier, like I mentioned, and I've said this before, when it's your time, man. I uh I don't think I could have messed that tournament up. I think it was my time to win. God controls that. I don't know why he picked me. I have no idea. But I think I think it's that simple. I put in my work. I do everything I can do above board. Put in the work, the time. I get it narrowed down, then it's up to God. And I'll tell you a perfect example. That 23-inch fish, I'd already talked to a bunch of people and I told them, man, I just need a big one and I'll have a good day. I'm missing a big one. And I went to the spot where I thought I was going to catch the big one a little bit, and it happened. Now, that fish could have been 21 and a half. That's still big to me, but it wouldn't have one big bass and all that. That's God's decision right there, man. It ain't my decision. I didn't make him be another inch longer. Nothing I
Yeah.
did that's just the way I believe. Just I live my life. I'm a real simple guy, and I just have learned over the years to just rely on whatever happened is God's will. That's it. And it was my time to win, man. And I hope he blesses me next Saturday too. And who knows? There's been plenty of times when I was on the wrong end, though. Believe me, plenty of times.
That's
That's it.
that is the best way to put it. I appreciate your words and your wisdom when it comes to that, and makes it, put it all in perspective. Michael, thanks you again for your time. It's been an honor to have you on the podcast. I'm sure we'll have you here again. If it's not talking about a big tournament win, we'll surely pick your brains on some other kayak fishing tactic that my listeners and our followers of the podcast would truly enjoy. So I think
Just give me a call, Armando, anytime.
my pleasure, and we certainly will. So, for those out there listening and watching, thank you so much. Remember, if you're listening on our MP3 formats, Apple Podcast, Spotify, leave us your 5-star reviews. If you're going to be out on the water, please wear your PFDs. Stay hydrated. Drink responsibly. Make sure you make it back home to your loved ones. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.